You know that old saying, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed? You never want your hunting knife to be not the sharpest tool in the shed. Last bonus episode we did, friends, was on replaceable blade hunting knives. Lightweight knives that use surgical steel, ultra sharp, disposable blades. I talked about what I consider to be 3 of the best. In that bonus episode, I promised to do a short piece on how to properly sharpen a knife. And I got a ton of feedback on that comment. So that's what we're here to do today, folks, is talk about how to put a good edge on a good quality hunting knife. And as I said on that episode, you know, if you're just starting out, it's just fine. I'm going to retract this statement. But if you're an old outdoorsman and you can't sharpen a knife, well, learn to sharpen one and get your man card back. So folks, in front of me here, for those of you watching the video on patreon.com/backcountry, I've got 3 knives, a small hand axe, and a bunch of sharpening tools. And I want to talk about how you choose a sharpening tool, meaning a stone, a strop, or whatever, and then how to apply a good blade to it so that you enhance the edge without damaging it. A lot of people attempt to sharpen their knife really, how shall I put it, enthusiastically, and tend to do more damage than good because they're not using good control. First, let's talk about the types of steel that you may have to sharpen. Okay, so in front of me I've got a green Riverworks blade. I think it's called the Russell. It's an old Mountain Man type of blade. These are made out of really soft steel. They're very easy to sharpen because they respond really quickly to a stone, whether it's a diamond stone or ceramic stone, native stone, whatever it is. I've also got a buck knife, and this is a particularly special one. This is kind of, I think, from their custom shop. It's got antler handles on it. Beautiful knife. The reason I've got it included here is because the steel in buck knives is known to be extremely hard. There used to be an advertisement that you could take a hammer and pound a knife blade through a typical mild steel bolt and it would cut the bolt. We don't recommend doing that. It's going to turn your edge at the very least and probably damage it, but it didn't break the blade is what Buck was saying. The trick with a buck knife or any knife of similar steel is that the steel is resistant to a stone. This is why they hold their edge so well, so long, once you get the edge right. Getting it right can be a bit of a challenge. The key with a super hard steel, such as in buck knives, is to be patient and just make sure that you use good technique, that you keep your angles consistent, and don't get impatient. Impatience is what ruins steel. And then the last one I've got here is one of our Simbita Custom Knives Northern Shrike models. This is the knife that Evan Simbita and I co-designed several years ago, and each year we sell a couple of limited edition special runs. This one's from a run, this was the prototype, of 12. We kind of called the Christmas knife. It's a stag antler knife as well. MagnaCut CPM is the steel that Evan uses in these Northern Shrike knives, and it's a state-of-the-art, very modern stainless steel that both responds well to a stone and yet also holds its edge in legendary fashion. So we're going to start with the premise that 2 of these knives need a serious edge dressing, not dressing, that's the word I want to use for the Northern Shrike. We want to start with the premise that 2 of these knives, the Green Riverworks and the buck knife, need the edge reconstructed, basically. We're going to start with not a coarse stone, but a medium grit stone, and then we'll progress on to a fine stone. With the Northern Shrike knife, I'll treat it as if we're just dressing the edge, just barely touching it up to carry on. I've got a knife made out of this steel that I butchered. I think it was 2 or 3 elk, 4 or 5 deer, several turkeys, pheasants, coyotes, and so forth last year with doing nothing but just touching it on a butcher's steel like you'd see in a chef's kitchen. Okay, so let's start at the beginning with our stones now. There's several different types. I like these by Easy Lap. It's a diamond type stone. And the ones I like best are the extra fine, which is what this smaller stone is. This is a 2" by 6". And then this bigger stone is a medium or a medium fine, and it's a 3 by 8". Now, when you get a brand new diamond surface stone, it's going to be really aggressive. It'll be so aggressive that it's bad for a fine blade. And this is because of all those diamond particles in there that haven't been kind of evened out. It's just a fresh, very textured, aggressive surface. So whenever I get a new stone, I'll use it to sharpen an axe. Whether it's a little hand axe like this that I like to put a razor edge on. This one is a hand axe by Gransfors in Sweden. They're my favorite axe company. Or a great big axe. A big axe is really useful for knocking down the aggressive texture on a brand new diamond stone. Now as I work here, folks, you're going to notice some strokes that appear to be me sharpening that blade toward my hand. But if you look closely, I always keep my fingers, my knuckles, everything below the edge of the stone, where the incoming edge could potentially touch it if it slips off the end of that stone. You do want to be really, really careful with this, folks. People do cut themselves badly on occasion when sharpening a blade. So there I was handling, for those of you that can't see, I was handling this small forest axe, this hand axe, almost like a knife to sharpen it. But if you need to do more aggressive work, you can use your medium cut or medium fine cut stone almost like a file. You can ideally put your axe in a wood vise on a woodworking bench or something like that. Or you can just hold it in one hand like I'm doing right here and stroke the blade with the stone held in your other hand. That's about all I'm going to do with this aggressive stone on this hand axe for now. Just kind of demonstrating what you can do to break in your diamond stone without damaging the fine edge on one of your good knives. Okay, so now let's go to this fixed blade Green Riverworks Russell model. And it's going to respond really, really fast because it's a soft steel. It's a good steel, but it'll respond very quickly to these strokes. I'm holding this stone up so those of you watching the video can see, but whether you leave it on the table and work, I'll demonstrate that quickly here. Sorry about the squeaky chair. You can control it a little better when it's laying on the table. Get an angle and stick with it. You don't want the angle to be too fine because that leaves the edge of your blade fragile, and you definitely don't want it too obtuse because then you can never get it fully sharp. The key is consistency. Find the same angle on each side and stroke that blade across your sharpening stone. Be aware that the stone is taking particles from the steel with every stroke. And I like to cut across the top of the stone as if I'm actually cutting or attempting to cut shavings off the top of that stone. If you pull your edge backward, it creates a much more sizable burr. And what you want to do is work that burr down from side to side, back and forth, getting it smaller and smaller as the surface on those edge angles get more and more polished. That burr will become microscopic, and then finally, some folks call it break off. I like to think of it as just kind of feathering off. The edge becomes so thin that the burr no longer has a foundation to hold on to the edge of it, and it just flakes off. As you work, feel the edge of your blade frequently with your fingers and your thumb, drawing them off the edge, and you'll learn to feel that burr. So you can tell two things: which side the burr is on, in case, like, say you set your knife down to take a phone call or something, you forgot which side you were working on when you come back to it. You can find that burr very quickly just by running your thumb or fingers off the edge. The other reason you need to be able to feel that burr is so that you can tell if you've got your angles right. on both sides. If the burr is building and building on one side and it just won't seem to work back to the other, you're not addressing that stone at a steep enough angle with your knife. So you may have to lift the spine of your blade, that's the back portion of it, that back edge, and it's not an edge, but people call it the back edge. Lift it up away from the stone just a little bit until you contact that burr and work it off toward the other side. So now I'm just working the edge, shaping it on this fixed blade hunting knife from side to side, working that burr back and forth to make sure I get a good, even, clean bevel. So two things to avoid: don't put a lot of pressure on the tip as you roll through that edge and approach the tip, because you can accidentally take too much off that tip and round the tip off. And maintain the angle. Don't go steeper with some strokes and then a less obtuse angle with other strokes. All that does is end up rolling or creating a rounded flat, that flat you're trying to polish into a mirror polish on your blade. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make, of not keeping their angle consistent. So I'm happy with the shape that I've created with that medium fine cut diamond stone. So now I'm going to transition to my little one. And of course, this sort of thing is what you do in your garage or your shop, your man cave, at home before you go hunting, right? You don't generally carry these big heavy stones into the field. So you want to get your edge in really, really good shape before you go hunting. And then we'll talk about how to dress your edge and keep it in really good shape during the hunt with a light stone next. So all I'm doing right here, for those of you who can't see, you just probably hear the strokes of the knife on this stone. I'm maintaining the same angles. I'm cutting gently across the top of this diamond stone, keeping my fingers out of the way meanwhile, and feeling that burr frequently. And the better your edge becomes, the more difficult it is to feel that burr, because it's becoming smaller and smaller. And that's what you want. You want it to get to the point where it's really hard to tell which side it's on, because then you're pretty well done. I'm going to try and change the angle here so you can see it a little bit better. Not the angle of my blade, the angle of the stone in front of this camera. Now, if you need to remove a lot of material, which sometimes you do need to, you can kind of scrub your blade or do little circles on your stone. Just be aware that as you do that, it will create a bigger burr, and it'll take you a little bit more time to polish it off at the end. But excuse me, there are times when you just need to do that in order to remove enough material from your edge. It doesn't take a lot. As you can see, I'm more or less just working with fine strokes here, checking the burr frequently on each side of the blade. You should just find it on one side unless somehow you're managing to twist your wrist as you run each stroke and you're sharpening one, like say the bottom edge of your portion more on one side and the tip edge on the other side. Then you can get a burr that kind of, I want to say figure eights, that's not a good term, but it kind of describes it. You know, it's on the one side on one edge and the other side out near the tip. Now, as you approach, where you want that edge to be, you'll take very fine, precise strokes across your stone. At this point, you don't want to be raising up another big, aggressive burr, because you've taken several deep strokes, pressured strokes down one edge of the blade. This one is coming together perfectly. I'm just finishing up on the fine cut, extra fine cut diamond stone, and I'm now ready to move to a strop. Right before I do that, I tend to take several real fine, gentle strokes down the length of the stone, the length of this blade on each side, but just one to polish back and forth that fine burr. Now, a strop is just a piece of leather, usually hard leather, backed by a piece of wood, and it's coated with a type of polishing compound. Now, they make specific stuff for strops. I'm using some green stuff here that came with a strop kit that I bought a while back. Works real well. You can also just use a fine cut jeweler's rouge or something like that. And now, of course, because this is a leather surface, you're going to pull the knife edge backward across the top of that strop. Now, this step is one that a lot of knife sharpeners ignore, and in the field I generally do as well. There are guys who actually prefer a really textured edge, such as you get from a more aggressive stone, but those edges don't hold. I find that if you work an edge down real fine, it'll last longer and it'll respond more quickly to simple dressing treatments. Typically on a strop, I'll do 4 or 5 strokes per side and then reverse and do the other side. And what I'm doing here is rolling that burr back and forth again, that little microscopic burr, and putting a real fine polish on that edge bevel. If you were to look at it under a magnifying glass, it would be starting to gleam as if you were putting it on a polishing wheel. And when you're done with this, your blade should be so sharp it just about scares the hair off your arm. Be careful with that, folks. You don't need to take a chunk out of your forearm to prove that your knife is sharp. And as I'm reaching the end with the strop, I'll just do a couple strokes on each side and then finish up with 1 stroke per side, reversing it back and forth a few different times, and I should have a really, really sharp edge there. So that's fantastic. We're going to, just in the interest of time for this video, I'm not going to do the buck knife. Just be aware that it will take a little longer because this steel is more resistant to being eroded away by this stone. And as I mentioned earlier, you need to be really, really conscious of maintaining your edge as you work on that. Let's go now and just touch up the blade on my northern shrike, and I'm going to demonstrate with my little field stone. This is a little 1 inch by 3 inch ultrafine diamond stone, also by Easy Lap. Carry it in a little leather case. I've had this thing for probably 20 years. It's got a little fishhook groove down the middle, which I never use, but it's there for those of you who fish a lot. So when you hold this tiny stone, be really careful that your fingertips don't protrude above the ends of the stone, because you're going to be taking strokes down that stone, and if you slide off the end, you could cut your fingertip or your thumb. You can also lay this down on a tabletop and work on it. Wouldn't ever lay it down on the top of your thigh or something and work on it like that, because it's too easy to slide off. And all I'm doing right here is just barely dressing that edge lightly from side to side, just polishing that burr up a little bit and moving it back and forth to get it lined up, and then using a few very fine strokes at the end to try and get it as centered as possible. Now, you can't get it perfectly centered with a stone like you can with a strop, but you get that burr, which are really, let's consider what those are for a moment. That burr is the microscopic saw teeth that make the cuts. And just like a chainsaw or any other type of saw, you need those microscopic teeth to be in alignment for it to cut cleanly. So that's what we're doing right here. We're standing those teeth up. Where teeth were broken out, we're freshing them. You'd have to put this under a microscope to see anything resembling teeth. But sometimes if you do that mentally, it helps you visualize the work you're doing on your blade. That feels just about perfect. Got it right the first time. That's all it takes usually, folks, is 2 or 3 minutes with a little diamond stone sitting next to your elk or your deer, your moose, bear, whatever it is, to touch up your blade and then get back to work. And I so much prefer doing that than replacing the blade in a little plastic handled knife. This is better for your soul. I'm not a big tree hugger, but it's better for the environment because you're not leaving foil blade wraps and discarded blades in the garbage when you're done. It's a tool that, if you take care of it, will take care of you throughout your life. So there you go, folks. Hope that kind of helped. If you have just one or two sharpening tools in your armory, your disposal, I would make it an extra fine diamond stone for work at home and a fine cut compact stone for carrying in the field. You can do all the work you need to do with those two. And then, of course, have a good quality knife that will take a very good edge and hold it for as long as you need it to. I'm Joseph Von Benedict, and I'll see you in the backcountry.